Hey guys, Dan Young here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a large hollow vessel out of some red maple. So here's the piece we're working with. It's about 12 inches by 5 inches. It's red maple, like I said, cut about a month ago, still pretty wet. And I'm going to try to revisit a form that I did recently, and this piece was pretty large. It's some big leaf maple, and I wasn't able to get enough material out of the outer edges here, so it opened up some really tiny cracks that bugged me, but other people might not notice. So I'm going to try to revisit that shape with this form here. It might end up a little bit smaller, but we'll see. So there's also some nice spalting running through this piece. You can see where the beetles came in and did some work, so that should look pretty nice. And we've got a little bit of ring shake here where the rings started to separate, and this big chunk here is going to want to come off at some point, so we'll have to deal with that as we rough the piece out. Alright, so I've had our piece sitting in a bag for a couple days with some shavings, and I decided last minute that I want to put a depression here around our little lip here. So I'm going to true this up and put our little depression in right between the spalting and the edge here, and we might do a bit of hammered texturing in there. All right, so our next step is to hollow our form out, and I've laid out the tools that I'm going to be using. These three are John Jordan tools, and this one is a Trent Bosch tool. And this first one is, well, both of these are hook tools, number 1 and 2. This one has not quite as severe a hook to it as this one. Might call that a gooseneck. So we'll start with this one, probably hollow out the first, I don't know, a quarter or so of the bowl or of the form, and then I'll transition to our number 2 hook tool here, and I'll use this for most of the form actually, and then move on to once we get to the very bottom, I'll probably use our straight tool, just because it's easy to clean up the little nub at the bottom with that. And then lastly, we'll scrape the bottom and sides and the top of the form with the Trent Bosch radius scraper. And this thing is super handy for cleaning up the inside, super easy, straightforward. You can change the orientation of the cutter, and all of these are super easy to sharpen. And I have a jig for the John Jordan cutters, which I'll demonstrate in just a second. And lastly, we have the Trent Bosch stabilizing system, which makes life super easy for hollowing. It takes a lot of control and attention to what's going on in the form when you're hollowing, and this thing takes about half of the workload mentally and physically away from you. So as you can see, it's got a laser attachment that shows you where the cutter is inside of the form, so you can get some pretty consistent wall thickness. So like I said, these are very easy to sharpen. There's a pin on the bottom, we just loosen that up, and I think it's reverse threaded. And pull that out, and then I have our jig here, and this is something you use with the Wolverine Vergrind jig, and we just insert it there, tighten it up. Oop, not that way. Tighten it up, and then we'll stick it in the jig and put a quick edge on it and do the other 3. So I believe this is about a 60-degree angle. I'm not sure off the top of my head. This is almost a fresh cutter, so the proper angle is already pretty much on there. So we have our bear grind jig, and just stick it in the corner there and put an edge on both sides. So the scraper is a little bit different. We need to remove the cutter head, kind of similar to the other ones. Just comes right out. And then we will set the angle for our grind on the platform. This one's a bit steeper than our hollowing tools. I'd say probably, I don't know, 80. And then basically, with our fingers, we're just going to take the cutter and then rotate it along the edge, like so. You got to be careful, real careful with your fingers here, because this is spinning pretty quick, and you don't want to get caught up in there. Make sure everything's tightened up, nice and tight. But this is the way Trent Bosch has demonstrated it, so you know, he's the master, so I kind of trust his judgment on it. Okay, we're set up with our hook tool and our laser as well, and so we'll just start hollowing this out with some real easy motions back and forth. and then I'll transition to our more bent hook tool and work my way out to the edges of the form. So on this piece, you'll notice we're getting a lot of kind of long, stringy shavings out of there, and that's because we're working with mostly side grain. If this were an end grain piece, we'd be getting a lot more like this, which doesn't collect in there and blows out of there pretty easily. So I usually like to do end grain pieces, but not all the time. So I managed to slice my knuckle down to the bone there with our freshly sharpened radius scraper. So this thing is pretty sharp. We had some dust down in our pin here, and the tool slipped and my hand just bumped into it, and that was enough to send the tool pretty deep into my finger. So got it patched up, and I'm not supposed to bend it, but what are you gonna do? Okay, so our piece is sanded up to 320 all around, and gonna do a little work up here. You can see I've already started. I did some indexing by hand or by eye around the rim here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just enough to help me keep these grooves dialed in so that I'm not drifting too much, and I probably will drift a little bit. I'm not an expert at any of this stuff, and I'm still practicing on my carving. So you can see, you know, it's not perfectly straight, my lines, but they end up looking pretty nice toward the end of the project, and maybe require a little bit of light sanding. And to do this carving, I'm using the Automach power carver, and it has a reciprocating head that vibrates and assists in the carving. And you might notice that I've also done a little bit of texturing down here. It's maybe hard to see, but I've used for that the same power carver, and instead of this bit, I'll put in a little carbide bit, and I'll use the tip to hammer in this texture. And you'll notice that it doesn't really, the carver won't do anything unless you put contact against the wood. So it creates kind of a nice random pattern, and it may look a little like you're drawing circles into the piece until you really get deep into the texturing, and it starts to look a little less forced, I guess, and more random. So we'll finish this up and then finish up our texturing. And we'll put some sanding sealer on it, sand that back, and then put some feet on the piece, and we'll be pretty close to finished. So I've got a little bit of torn grain, which is okay. We can sand that out. I'm going to use just a little strip here, probably 240. Anything lower is just going to leave some pretty ugly lines that I don't want to bother with. So I'll just create a little groove, and I want to be careful not to sand the ridges because then they'll just lose their shape. So I have our piece mounted on a jam chuck of sorts. It's not a true jam chuck because it's not actually jammed on there. And I have the tailstock up so that I can work the bottom. And I didn't show you the foot process, but if you're interested in seeing that, it's in most of my other videos. So all that's left really is to sand the bottom and put the signature on and oil it up. So if you're watching, really thank you for watching. I really appreciate you. If you're an expert or a beginner, hopefully you learned something.